Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. Without all of your thoughts, desires, and feelings, the imaginary you, the false self, could not exist. So to say that the false self likes the world of thoughts, desires, and feelings is an understatement. The imaginary you, the false self, needs these to survive. As long as you perceive yourself as the you who has dreams, desires, fears, self-images, stories, beliefs, and so forth, you'll be more interested in the egoic mind's illusory world than the real world. Reality, the world of the senses and the subtle world, is not of much interest to the mind-generated you, which loves the drama created by thoughts and feelings. But there's another you here. That you is the one I'm speaking to, and the one who's listening to this. Isn't that funny that we can talk about you this way? It's like we're talking about you behind your back. We're talking about the illusory you behind its back. We can do that because it's imaginary. Notice how it can't talk about the real you behind its back. It doesn't work the other way around because the imaginary you can't perceive the truth about itself, since it doesn't exist and it isn't what perceives. What perceives the truth about the imaginary you is the real you. Hello there, how nice to have you here. Welcome to your awakening, to waking up to the truth about life. You're receiving the truth on an intellectual level right now, but many of you are also getting a glimpse, a realization of it too, since a realization is only a little step away from an intellectual understanding. There's no end to the depth to which the truth can be realized. At whatever depth you're realizing it, that is the right experience, and that will take you to the next level. Although you can't really skip levels, you might move through some levels very quickly. You don't have to worry about how realization unfolds, however, because something very wise is in charge of your realization, and it is also benevolent. Just as the imaginary reality created by the thought stream seems real, the imaginary you created by thoughts and feelings seems like the real you, and other people's self-images and your images of them seem like who they really are too, even though these could be vastly different. This wouldn't be so much of a problem if the imaginary you were more like the real you, but they're nearly opposite. The imaginary you is afraid of life, while the real you loves and embraces life. The imaginary you distrusts life and itself, while the real you trusts life and trusts the flow of life through itself. The imaginary you is guarded and closed toward others, while the real you is open and loving. The imaginary you is judgmental, while the real you is accepting and forgiving. The imaginary you is self-centered, while the real you knows there is no personal self that needs anything. The imaginary you feels lacking and inadequate, while the real you knows it has access to everything needed to flourish and be happy. The imaginary you lacks the love, compassion, courage, inner strength, patience, wisdom, and clarity that define the real you. The imaginary you produces negative emotions, while the real you produces love, peace, gratitude, joy, courage, strength, patience, compassion, kindness, inspiration, and wisdom. The imaginary you feels unworthy and not good enough, while the real you accepts and forgives its own imperfections and mistakes and is not defined by them. The real you recognizes that making mistakes and learning from them is how progress is made. The you that many traditional religions reflect back to you, the you they believe you to be, is more like the imaginary you than the real you. To the degree that religions do this, they reinforce and maintain the illusion. They see you as separate from God and fail to recognize that God resides in you. They assume that who you are is your egoic self, which keeps you and themselves in a prison of limitation, inadequacy, fear, guilt, and distrust in one's own power. That may be to their advantage in maintaining their own hierarchy and power, but it's not to your advantage to see yourself this way. To their credit, religions do encourage people to aspire to be more like their true self. However, most religions don't offer a very effective way for becoming that, beyond telling people what not to do. Few religions offer the types of spiritual practices that enable people to experience their true nature, because they don't even see this as a goal. Believing that this imaginary you, the one who feels lacking, unworthy, fearful, and distrusting, is who you really are, is problematic, because such a you is not very effective in the world, unless you become the other possibility, one that religion suggests you not become, someone who's selfish, greedy, ruthless, and power-hungry. Either way, this imaginary you stands little chance of finding true happiness or love. If this is how you feel about yourself, love doesn't easily flow toward others or to yourself. The irony is that love, the very thing religions tout, is blocked by the image of yourself as sinful, unworthy, flawed, weak, distrusting, and frightened. And of course, love is also blocked by the opposite persona, selfish, greedy, ruthless, and power-hungry. The real problem is that believing you are this imaginary you, this false self, makes it hard to believe you are the real you and the qualities exemplified by that. How do you move from believing you are the imaginary you, the false self, to knowing who you really are? Even if it wanted to, the imaginary you can't help you discover who you really are, because it's imaginary. The only thing that can help you discover this is the real you. It's the only thing that has ever done anything in your life, including pretend to be the imaginary you. To move from the imaginary you to the real you, you have to have some experience of the real you. For that, you have to have seen through the illusion at least a little bit. That happens when the real you begins to wake up within you. This is a mysterious and momentous event in one's spiritual evolution, which many only become aware of when they find themselves questioning life more deeply. This often lands them on the spiritual path, where they hopefully can get help moving from the imaginary you, the false self, to the real you. Traditional religions and self-help programs, on the other hand, generally try to help people move from the imaginary you to a better version of this imaginary you, one that's happier, more gentle and kind, and more successful. However, if you still believe you are sinful and unworthy, these efforts are like trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. The imaginary you can learn to feel better about itself and behave better, but its basic identity will always be that of someone who is flawed and lacking. The imaginary you can become happier, kinder, and more successful by taking on new beliefs and self-images that are more aligned with the true self. This is a common stepping stone and often pokes enough of a hole in the illusion to allow people to realize who they really are more clearly, which is not an idea or an image, but an experience. There's a big difference between believing you are loving and good and experiencing the self that is love and goodness. Nevertheless, the belief in your innate goodness is often the bridge to the experience of who you really are. The shift to believing you are loving and good is able to be made by recognizing that self-images such as flawed, bad, unworthy, inadequate, and not good enough are not true, and then affirming the opposite. This reprogramming of mistaken beliefs and self-images is how the spell of the illusion is ultimately broken. Affirming that you have the qualities of the true self opens the door to experiencing who you really are and the very qualities you've been affirming. But make no mistake, the new, healthier, happier self-image is not who you really are. It only makes discovering who you are easier. This healthier self-image can still be corrupted by the ego. For instance, your happier, more successful, imaginary you might conclude that you're now better than others because you've figured out how to manifest success through confidence and a more positive attitude. But that's still not the true self, only just another more functional self-image. The experience of who you are doesn't turn you into someone special, but instead eliminates any sense of specialness the ego might have enjoyed. It also wipes out egoic drives that push people to be successful for the sake of success alone. Realizing who you really are changes everything. You can't get lost in the illusion in the same way anymore. This makes you different from others, which can be challenging. You don't fit in like you used to, but that doesn't matter to you. You're content and not looking for anything outside yourself to make you happy. The most miraculous thing about this state of consciousness, which is your natural state, is that it enables you to accept life just as it is and see the good in it. You're no longer a struggling, lacking person up against a fearful world where the odds are stacked against you. Instead, you feel more like the child of an abundant and loving Father who's given you everything you need to survive and be happy. In this state of consciousness, it's easy to see the truth about life, its goodness, beauty, and support. Once you see this, then that goodness and bounty become more available to you. What you believe to be true about reality becomes your reality. If you believe in a world that's against you, then that will be your experience. If you believe in a world that is supportive, then that will be your experience. The proof of this is that the experience of life in the egoic state of consciousness is primarily one of strife and suffering, while the experience of life in your natural state is one of grace. And yet reality hasn't changed at all, only your perception of it. When you change your beliefs, your experience of reality changes. The fact is that reality has always been the way it is, good, supportive, and plentiful. It's just that most people don't recognize this. Thank you for being here. I am with you always.